In this video, I'm about to show you how downtown Chicago is collapsing right before our eyes as companies flee and empty office towers bleed millions of dollars every single month. I've lived in the Chicago area my whole life, 68 years. I remember when State Street was packed shoulder to shoulder. I remember when you couldn't find a parking spot in the Loop on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember when the skyline meant something. It meant power. It meant prosperity. It meant that Chicago was a city that worked. But now I drive downtown and I feel like I'm in a ghost town. Empty towers, for lease signs everywhere, businesses boarded up. And the few people you do see on the street look over their shoulders the whole time. This isn't the city I grew up in, and the saddest part is that it didn't have to happen. Bad policies, bad leadership, and a whole lot of denial brought us here. Let me show you the numbers, the brands that left, the towers that are bleeding cash, and why your pension might be next. Let me start with the number that keeps me up at night. According to CBRE, a commercial real estate firm that tracks this stuff, the office vacancy rate in downtown Chicago hit over 22% in the last quarter. That's more than 1 in every 5 office spaces sitting empty. In the Loop specifically, the historic heart of the city, vacancy is even higher, almost 25%. A quarter of the offices in downtown Chicago are empty. Think about that. A quarter of the space that used to be filled with workers, with activity, with tax revenue, is now gathering dust. Before the pandemic, in 2019, the vacancy rate was around 12%. So it's nearly doubled in 4 years. That's not a dip, that's a collapse. According to the same report, Chicago now has the highest office vacancy rate of any major American city except San Francisco. We're beating New York, we're beating Los Angeles, we're beating Houston, and not in a good way. What does that mean for you? Every empty office tower means less property tax revenue. Less property tax revenue means the city has to raise taxes on homeowners and small businesses to make up the difference. So you and I are paying for these empty buildings. The owners of those towers are bleeding millions, and they're passing the pain along to the rest of us. The city's budget office estimated that the drop in commercial property values will cost the city over $200 million in annual tax revenue by next year. $200 million. That's money that's not going to fix potholes, not going to hire police officers, not going to keep the libraries open. Let me talk about a building that breaks my heart, the Willis Tower, but I still call it the Sears Tower. I always will. That building was the tallest in the world when I was a kid. It was a symbol of American ambition. And now it's struggling. According to filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the occupancy rate in the Sears Tower has dropped to around 70%. That's down from 95% just 5 years ago. 30% of that massive building is empty. Who left? A lot of law firms, a lot of financial services companies. One of the biggest tenants, a company called United Global, moved most of its staff to remote work and never brought them back. They still pay some rent, but they're using maybe 10% of the space they used to. So the building is empty, but the lights are still on, the elevators are still running, the security guards are still there. All that costs money. The owners of the Sears Tower, a group of investors led by a firm called EQ Office, have been trying to refinance their mortgage. But banks are nervous. They look at the vacancy rate and they say, "We're not sure you can make the payments." So the owners are bleeding cash. They're losing millions every month. And eventually, they're going to default. And when they default, the banks take over and the property values plummet and the city loses even more tax revenue. The Aon Center is another one. That's the white marble building right on the lake. It's the 3rd tallest building in Chicago, and it's in trouble. According to a report in Crane's Chicago Business, the owners of the Aon Center tried to sell the building last year. They were asking for over $250 million. That sounds like a lot, but the building was valued at over $800 million just 7 years ago, so the value has dropped by more than 2/3. And you know what? They couldn't find a buyer. Not at $250 million, not at $200 million, not at $150 million. They pulled the building off the market because no one wanted it. Why? Because the Aon Center is mostly empty. The anchor tenant, Aon, the insurance company, moved most of their employees to a different building. Other tenants followed. Now the building is about 60% occupied. 60%. That's not enough to cover the operating costs, let alone the mortgage. The owners are losing an estimated $5 million a month. $5 million every month. That's $60 million a year. And here's the kicker, the Aeon Center was sold just last year to a new owner for a fraction of its previous value. The new owner is a distressed asset firm. They buy buildings that are failing and try to turn them around, but even they are struggling. They've been trying to lease the empty space for a year and a half, almost no takers. Because companies don't want to be in Chicago anymore. The crime, the taxes, the chaos, it's not worth it. Let me give you a list of the brands that have left downtown Chicago in just the last 3 years, and I want you to really let this sink in. Boeing moved to Virginia. Caterpillar moved to Texas. Citadel moved to Miami. Tyson Foods moved to Arkansas. Archer Daniels Midland moved their headquarters from Chicago to their existing campus in Decatur, Illinois. That's not a loss for the state, but it's a loss for downtown. That's hundreds of jobs that used to be in the Loop that are now 2 hours south. But the list doesn't stop there. BMO Harris Bank moved hundreds of jobs from their downtown office to a new facility in the suburbs. Kraft Heinz moved their headquarters out of the Aeon Center to a smaller space in the suburbs. Hilscher Brands, the meat company, left for the suburbs. And just last month, CME Group, the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, announced they are consolidating their downtown offices and moving a chunk of their staff to a new facility in the suburbs. The Chicago Tribune analyzed the exodus last year and found that downtown Chicago has lost over 25,000 jobs since 2020. 25,000. That's the population of a small town. And those aren't just any jobs. They're high-paying, white-collar, professional jobs. The kind of jobs that support restaurants, retail, parking garages, and all the other businesses that make a downtown work. Let me walk you down State Street. Not in your imagination. Actually think about the last time you were there. The old Marshall Fields building. Now it's a Macy's. And that Macy's is barely hanging on. According to retail analysts, the State Street Macy's is one of the chain's worst performing locations. Sales are down over 40% from pre-pandemic levels. The store used to have 9 floors of merchandise. Now it's down to 5. The rest are empty, dusty, closed off. Why? Because the foot traffic is gone. The office workers who used to shop at Macy's on their lunch breaks are gone. The tourists who used to come to Chicago for conventions and shopping are gone, or there are fewer of them. And the people who live downtown are afraid to walk to State Street because of the crime. The Chicago Police Department's own data shows that thefts and robberies in the Loop are up over 60% since 2019. 60%. So even the people who live nearby don't want to go. The other stores on State Street are suffering too. The Gap closed. H&M is hanging on, but their sales are down. The Disney store closed years ago. The Nike store is still there, but they've reduced their hours and their security is heavier than Fort Knox. You have to walk through a metal detector to buy a pair of sneakers. That's not shopping. That's an obstacle course. You can't talk about the collapse of downtown without talking about the restaurants. The places where we used to celebrate anniversaries, take grab a quick lunch. So many of them are gone. The Berghoff. That place was open for over 120 years. It survived Prohibition, the Great Depression, 2 world wars. It couldn't survive the pandemic and the collapse of downtown. Closed in 2021. The building is still there, the sign is still up, but the doors are locked. Italian Village. That was a landmark. 3 restaurants in one building, opened since 1927. They closed one of their 3 concepts last year because of lack of business. The other 2 are hanging on, but the owner said in an interview that they're losing money every month. They're basically waiting for things to get better, but things aren't getting better. Even the chains are struggling. The McDonald's on Clark Street, the one that used to be packed at lunchtime, is now a ghost town. I walked by there last month at noon on a Wednesday. There were maybe 10 people inside. 10. In a McDonald's that used to serve hundreds. The Panera on LaSalle Street closed. The Potbelly on Madison closed. The Starbucks on Dearborn closed. Every closed restaurant means lost jobs. Every lost job means fewer people spending money. Every fewer person spending money means more restaurants close. It's a death spiral. Here's a sign of the times that you might not think about. Parking garages. The places where all those office workers used to park their cars, they're going bankrupt. According to a report in the Sun-Times, over 15 parking garages in downtown Chicago have filed for bankruptcy or are in default on their loans in the last 2 years. 15. That's almost a third of the garages in the Loop. Why? Because nobody is parking there. Before the pandemic, the average downtown parking garage was about 80% full on weekdays. Now it's about 40%. Some garages are less than 20% full, and they can't lower their prices enough to attract customers because they have fixed costs, they have mortgages, they have maintenance, they have security, they have to pay property taxes. One garage owner, a man named Steve, was quoted in the article. He said, "I used to make a good living. Now I'm losing $50,000 a month. I've laid off half my staff. I'm thinking about just walking away." Steve is a small business owner. He's not a billionaire. He's a guy who saw an opportunity and borrowed money to buy a garage. And now that garage is a liability. It's bleeding cash, and he's going to lose everything. The banks that lent money to these garage owners are also in trouble. They're holding millions of dollars in bad loans. And when those loans default, the banks tighten their lending standards. That means it's harder for other small businesses to borrow money. The ripple effects are enormous. A collapsing parking garage industry might sound like a niche problem, but it's a symptom of a much larger disease. And the disease is the collapse of downtown. It's not all bad news. There are some brands that are staying in downtown Chicago, and I want to give them credit because they're fighting the tide. One of them is McDonald's. Their headquarters is in the West Loop. They have over 2,000 employees working there, and they're not leaving. They just renovated their campus. They spent over $250 million on it. That's a huge vote of confidence. Why are they staying? Because they believe in the city. Their CEO, Chris Kempczynski, is from Chicago. He wants to make it work. But even McDonald's has reduced its office footprint. They're allowing more remote work. So while they're staying, they're not bringing as many people downtown as they used to. That's the pattern everywhere. Companies are staying, but they're shrinking. Another brand that's staying is United Airlines. Their headquarters is in the Willis Tower. They have over 3,000 employees in downtown Chicago. United CEO Scott Kirby has been critical of the city's leadership, but he hasn't moved the company. He's invested in Chicago. He's committed, but again, United is allowing more remote work. Their office is only about 50% full on any given day. Then there's BMO Tower. That's the new building on the south side of the loop. BMO Harris Bank built that tower right before the pandemic. It's beautiful. It's state-of-the-art. And it's about 60% empty. BMO is contractually obligated to pay the rent, but they're not using the space, so they're bleeding money too. They're paying for a building they don't need because they signed a long-term lease. That's not loyalty, that's a contract. Let me bring this home to you. How does the collapse of downtown Chicago affect your property taxes? Directly and painfully. The city's budget relies heavily on property taxes from commercial buildings. When those buildings lose value, the city has to raise taxes on residential properties to make up the difference. According to the Cook County Assessor's Office, the average homeowner in Chicago will see their property tax bill increase by over $1,200 over the next 2 years because of the decline in commercial property values. $1,200. That's real money. And it's not just property taxes. The city is also losing sales tax revenue because there are fewer people shopping downtown. They're losing hotel tax revenue because there are fewer tourists. They're losing income tax revenue because there are fewer high-paid workers. Every single revenue stream is shrinking, and the city's expenses are growing. Pensions, police, fire, sanitation, all of it costs more every year. The Civic Federation, a nonpartisan budget watchdog, projects that the city will have a budget deficit of over $300 million next year. $300 million. That's a hole so deep you can't fill it with small tax increases. The city is going to have to make big cuts or raise big taxes. Either way, you and I are going to pay, either through higher taxes or through reduced services. I live in DuPage County, not Chicago, and even my property taxes went up last year because of the spillover effect. The state is struggling, so the state raises taxes. The county is struggling, so the county raises taxes. The school district is struggling, so they raise taxes. It never ends. And it all started with the collapse of downtown. Here's the truth that nobody in City Hall wants to admit. The collapse of downtown Chicago is not a temporary problem, it's a structural problem, and it's just beginning. According to a study by the University of Illinois at Chicago, the shift to remote work is permanent. About 30% of office workers in downtown Chicago are now fully remote. Another 40% are hybrid, coming in 2 or 3 days a week. That means the amount of office space needed has permanently dropped by about 30%. That 30% reduction in demand means that about a third of downtown office buildings are no longer economically viable. They will never be full again. They will never generate the tax revenue they used to. They will eventually be converted to other uses, like apartments or hotels, or they will be torn down. But that conversion process takes years and costs billions of dollars, and in the meantime, the city bleeds. The commercial real estate firm JLL estimates that the owners of downtown Chicago office buildings have lost over $10 billion in value since 2020. $10 billion. That's more than the entire budget of the city, and most of that loss will eventually be passed on to taxpayers, either through higher taxes or through bailouts. I don't have a silver bullet, I don't have an easy answer, but I know that the current leadership isn't even asking the right questions. They're still pretending that if they just raise taxes on the wealthy, everything will be fine, but the wealthy have already left. They're in Florida, they're in Texas, they're in Tennessee, and they're not coming back.